On stage right now, we have the moderator for our third session, Trisha Yeo, Chief Operating Officer of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, Sandra Hanchard, co-founder of Big Data Malaysia, Lee Shuang Goh, Country Lead Public Policy and Government Affairs of Google Asia Pacific, and Divya Desai, Regional Head of Policy and Research of Grab Taxi.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. If you could all take your seats, we'll be starting our third and final panel discussion of the day. So this morning, we spoke a lot about how open data and access to information can help governments and governments to get closer to their citizens and voters by being more transparent and accountable. This afternoon, we have a very different take on how open data and access to information can help us, but from the perspective of businesses. And I think we had some of that in the morning session when MDEC talked about technology and business, but today we have with us actual practitioners on the ground, people who are representing the private sector and corporates on how open data has helped them. So the title of our panel is on open data and economic growth and benefits to business. So we have a very established panel here, names that you would know. So on my far left is Lee Shuang Goh, who is the country lead in public policy and government affairs from Google Asia Pacific. All of us open our Googles every day, so we'd like to hear from you. And he will reflect on how organizations can benefit from open data and how they can develop innovative solutions. On my left here is Divya Desai. Is that correct? Desai? She's the regional head of policy and research of Grab Taxi. If any of us have used the My Taxi apps in our phones, this is the company behind My Taxi. And it's a Malaysian-born company, so we can be very proud of that. Divya here will relay also a personal account on how Grab Taxi grew as a startup using data that's available to them. And of course, with the app that people use, they have a lot of data points, and in fact, these data points can actually help us in public policy. And finally, on my right, I have Sandra Hanchard, who is the co-founder of Big Data Malaysia, who will discuss the current interest in big data and what types of companies use open data for their business. So I think each of them will tell you more about themselves. And Sandra, you can talk to us about what does big data do, and you also have some presentation slides. So this afternoon, we'll be talking about how data helps business, and I hope that some of you who are representing business can also share your own experiences. So let's pass the time over to Sandra.
Yes, I'd like to talk more about the demand side of open data, and I'd like to coin a term, informal data economies. So when you're in business, you're not really thinking about open data, closed data as such. It's more like, what data can I use for whatever outcome or service that I'd like to provide to the consumers in the community. So firstly, who are we? Okay, so if we could just go to the first slide. So Big Data Malaysia is a community. We have about 3,000 members in our network. And we started in 2012, and we're about raising awareness and education and networking around big data. And when we started up the group, it was a tiny little meetup, and I think there was beginning to be awareness of what big data was, and now it's kind of turned big data analytics. And what I find interesting about open data is that we're going through the same sort of growth curve, if you like. So I think there's emerging interest in open data, and we've got some really great provision of open data from the government, from MDEC and MAMPU, and all the initiatives that they've given out would have been really great. So now we're starting to see more businesses, startups, develop an interest in open data and how they can actually apply it. And I think the tricky question, the grey area, is the monetisation of open data, which I think a lot of people don't quite get at the moment because it's quite grey. So the next slide, we've done a bit of research on the big data analytics sector in Malaysia, and there's not much research on the Malaysian sector. There's lots of sort of ASEAN reports out. So we did the first study, if you like, of the Malaysian big data analytics sector last year, and we found that it's out of our network about 50% that are out of ICT sectors who are actually developing big data analytics solutions. And a lot of the capabilities and what they're trying to use it for is towards consumer growth rather than things such as efficiency. So we ran a quick part of our survey. We asked people how many of you use. We asked them about the mix of different types of data that they used. We found that within the ICT sectors, about 20% of their data mix was from open data, and the non-ICT was 6%. And this was before the data.gov.my initiative, so we're running new research now to see how this picture has changed. So it's still very much, as I said, nascent. We still don't quite know what open data means in a commercial context. I spoke to some people who have got new startups, and to them open data means minimum barriers in terms of the legal, commercial and technical constraints. And I think what the interesting part of it now is not so much the provision but the actual use of the data and stimulating economies of closed and open data sets. So if we think about innovation and what's sort of fueling these startups, this is kind of my techie cool slide with IoT, cloud, big data, and that's sort of the infrastructure that are fueling things such as smart cities, the users, the government, enterprise and citizens, and what we're aiming towards. So efficiency, safer cities, better use of energy, sustainability and so forth. Next slide. And we've seen some really interesting services emerge from these technologies, so I call them tech enablers. So even businesses such as Airbnb, which is an accommodation, people at home can let out parts of their house through, the Airbnb site, and you've got Uber, I call them vigilante taxi drivers. So who's used Uber before in Malaysia? So you realise you're just going into some random stranger's car, and you don't know anything about that person. There's the endorsement system that's through the website. And I shared this with some students last week, and I said, what do Airbnb and Uber have in common? Well, they're billion-dollar businesses, and neither of them own any inventory. They're merely intermediaries. So some really interesting business models that are emerging. So now I'd like to share with you examples of startups, businesses in Malaysia who are using open or informal data sets. And so who's doing it? So data-driven businesses. We've got analytics and data visualization consultancies, so people who are quite savvy with data. We've got intermediaries and aggregators. I'll share some examples of it soon. And typically you find the financial sector quite advanced in terms of using different types of data sets. And what are they doing with it? Well, they're interested in behavioural targeting and advertising. How do they monetize it? That's a good question. Some of them provide free recent data and then provide a premium historical data service. They're providing tools, analytics, data visualizations, or reputation endorsement systems. So there's a wide range of creativity and approaches to monetizing open data. So this first one is ORTech. So they're a data visualization and analytics consultancy. So they use a tool called Tableau, and Tableau's a data visualization tool. It's fantastic. You don't need any scripting skills, but you can connect to big data sources. And I've actually used Tableau to teach journalism students. So people who have no programming experience can actually use tools like this to connect to big data sources. For ORTech, they use it as an engagement tool. Next one. We have TransitWatch. TransitWatch provides, they're looking towards providing an app for estimated time arrivals for the bus. And this is great because it's targeted at low to middle income Malaysians. And we actually have the founder of TransitWatch here today, Jaime, just wave at the back. So everything you heard about this morning from the London, what they're doing with transport, we have Jaime here in Malaysia who's trying to provide services for low to middle income Malaysians to have a better public transport system, and what they're doing is fantastic. Yep. A company called Bricks. So they actually collect web scraping, if you like, property statistics off some of the major portals. You probably know which ones they are. So they're trying to increase the transparency in the property market. Then the next one, so this is Moneyline. So the CTO, their data science team is based in Malaysia, and they use they're trying to provide access to credit through personal endorsements. So another use of open data, and they're heavily hiring for data scientists in Malaysia. So they're another interesting business. There was one before that, PropStats, and they're trying to provide an endorsement for the property market for overseas investors. So using mixtures of open and closed data. So what are some of the perspectives of open data in Malaysia? ORTech saying we can always do more. There's lots of people we've got talent in the mobile app community. Let's connect them to using the open data. A really great quote from Jaime saying, one problem he finds is that people say, whenever he tries to pitch an idea, people say yes, but they always see the problems in it, rather than having the attitude, yes, and let's build on top of that, what other ideas they can do it. So a lot of this is a cultural change in terms of having a positive risk, an appetite for taking risk is what we sort of need in this country and this region. And then PropStats, they're looking for win-win partnerships, so they're actually scraping some data, but for them it's about exchanging, returning value. Yeah. So I think part of today is raising the awareness, creating excitement around open data. It's not dusty old files. Some of it's guerrilla tactics. So we've got problems with gatekeepers of information. Crowdsourcing. You go direct to the public to get data if you need to. And as I said, data.gov.my is a fantastic resource, and I'm trying to encourage people to use it more. I think as MDEC said this morning, it's still in the early stages, but we're, some live data or greater range of data sets, and I think more socialisation of the people using the data, so more stories about using data. So it's all very well to ask the government to open the data, but what about business? I think trying to get businesses to open up their data sets is a huge challenge. I used to work at Experian Hitwise, which is a internet measurement firm. And for us, there was a lot of value in releasing, aggregated data sets to the public. We used it for marketing. We provided it to research houses to provide some R&D, and in return we got some R&D from it. So there's actually a lot of sort of an exchange of value if you do open up your data sets in the private sector. Nearly done. What else needs to happen? We need to help people understand, intellectual property rights, exchange of value, the notion of a creative commons, so other people can use your data and build upon it. I think we need greater awareness around IP. And finally, I just have to say there's a huge amount of, cultures of giving back. So talking to these, the startup entrepreneurs saying that when they get to a certain level, they'd like to open up their infrastructure to allow other researchers, opening up their APIs. So I think there's a good understanding that if you're taking from the data ecosystem, you're also contributing back to it. And finally, skills. So in the big data, people talk about data science, and at the moment it's very much targeted towards science and engineering graduates. But what I would really like to encourage is people who don't have programming skills to be able to, use data, use tools like Tableau, be able to scrape data for themselves, to be able to tell stories, especially in data journalism. And just actually, we need to focus on the democratisation of data skills is really important. And we're conducting a survey on how people monetise open data. So we're at bigdatamalaysia.org, and it's a survey that we're currently running now to understand the open data ecosystem. Okay, and you can find us on Facebook. 3,000 people there, so that's where all the chatter happens. Thank you.